Hello, hello, the people.
Original episode of the Crowns and Chaos podcast starts right now. And I'm
Right
so
this minute.
we're going to kick off this podcast, this vlog, this project, which has in many different ways been simmering just under the surface for years now. It's had a number of different names and different iterations. Some of them never even saw the light of day. The two factors remained you and me, and this deep seated understanding that what we have, the medicine that we have for the world, needed to get out there. And we kept trying to attach different things to like, it should look like this, or we could do this, or this is how we should show up. And then it like stalled out, right? And so Crowns and Chaos is really about the message. It might be messy, it might be the opposite of linear. It'll probably be all those things, thus chaos, right? But in all things, we're going to hold the sovereign line, which is where the crowns come in. And we're just going to have really great conversations about really deep topics without the expectation of it to be anything or to have anyone necessarily listen or resonate. We're just going to have fun talking about the things that we talk about all the time because we do have proof in our field that people want to hear more of it. So,
And today, I think we're going to talk about self-awareness, self-mastery, but all of that starts with like knowing thyself. And I think this is a good starting place because it is, where else would you start other than
I
to know yourself?
right. So on the Temple of Apollo, there were those two words written in Greek, know thyself, right? And you and I were just talking about this morning on how all the work that we've done to understand consciousness, reality. I try and avoid the term spirituality because I feel like it's been hijacked and it means a very specific thing. And the more spiritual I've gone, the more like grounded I've become in real life. And not like I'm not out there floating in space feeling like I am the void. I'm able to really, as I've come through it, ground myself in what really is. And the two words, know thyself, like the whole journey for me was to who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of life? What are we even doing here? And at the end of all of those answers, which I mean, we're always, learning in a deeper level, it was like, you're right here. That's it. Like you are who you are, and the whole goal of life is to just know yourself, period. Just know yourself, because knowing yourself is the only way from which you can know the world around you, but that also the only way you can know yourself is through the world around you. And so to know thyself, you actually have to be yourself, and that I think is what most people are in extreme avoidance of.
So when we talk about knowing ourselves through others, and only being able to know others through knowing yourself. One thing that we're going to ask you to do throughout this entire journey with us is to be able to hold two conflicting things simultaneously because the nature of this universe is paradoxical, right? And so you're going to have to be able to live in a paradox and hold things that seem like they contradict each other all the time. And so we're just going to melt those into like a little cauldron and call it a stew, okay? Because they're not separate. So, knowing yourself, you can only know yourself through the reflections of others. And a lot of people get lost in that and they think that they are the reflection of others. Like everybody's heard the world is a reflection of you, like your vibe attracts your tribe, like all these little sayings. And yes, they're true, and no, they're not. You no, they're not, because you have to find out who you truly are. Otherwise, like all of those reflections can be false. Like they can be reflecting who you're not. So you have to know others to be able to know yourself, and you have to know yourself to be able to know others. And being yourself, being authentic, is both very rigid and very malleable at the same time.
I think we started to see this when and by this, by like know ourselves, like everyone's seeking to know themselves, but can only know themselves through the reflection of themselves and others. And you can take that like really kind of high level and just say, like, I only know what I like by knowing what I don't like. That's one way to know what you like is by being presented with, and we do this with kids from a very young age. We're like, what's your favorite color? And like you gotta think about it. Be like, I don't know, I like all the colors, but like, what's your favorite? Right? We are either unconsciously or just societally conditioned to help or to encourage kids to start defining and confining themselves from very young age. What's your favorite animal? What do you want to be when you grow up? Because you can't be nothing, right? How would you go through the world if you had no favorites? You didn't know what you liked. You stood in front of the buffet line going, like, what do I do? You can't navigate the world without at least identifying some things about yourself that you like. But we also see this in the way that people just absolutely gobble up assessments, quizzes. I know my disc profile, I know my Enneagram type, I know all the things, right? Because anytime someone's like, hey, I can tell you more about yourself, I'm like, I'm in. Like, tell me more about myself because I don't know. We only know through the reflections of others. Sometimes that looks like I'm struggling with a thing and I'm gonna go talk to my friend, and my friend is gonna reflect back to me. If they're conscious of the process, they will hold space for me to just be a mirror, right? And so they'll repeat back to me what I've said. So I'm hearing you say this, or in the past, you've said this. And so maybe that plays in here. If they're not, then they're going to project their own beliefs onto you. And then you're going to take that as your own. And you're going to be like, well, this was the advice they gave. They're my friend. I trust them. And so now I know this thing about myself. And so we can learn about ourselves in those two ways. We can just absorb what's around us, which I think is what you had referenced earlier, or we can learn about ourselves through the reflections of ourselves in others. Good friends are very good about being reflections and not necessarily projecting their own thoughts, beliefs, or desires upon you. But either way, it's our job to discern which is happening. And so anytime you ask anyone for any advice, there needs to be a consciousness or an awareness around this is their opinion. Does this resonate? Does it feel good in my body? Do I want this to be true or not? So when you hear as a child, you talk too much. I got that all the time. I took that as meaning I talked too much and that people didn't want to hear what I had to say. And like it took me years, and you were part of this journey for me. When people first started asking me to coach, I was like, why would you want to know what I have to say? Like, why? I'm not like, I don't have anything to offer you, because I had been told for so long that my voice didn't matter. Right. And so it was a conscious uncoupling with that belief set. So oftentimes we're being fed something that's not our own, and we just take that to be true and then we carry it as though it is.
Yeah, the intentional creation of self or the unintentional creation of self, right? Because you can start intentionally crafting who you are, and that looks like shedding the layers of who you've been told that you are. And I think one of the notes that you wrote down for us to talk about was about like the adage that you're the culmination of the five people you spend the most time with, right? And we just mentioned this in the Mobile Bev Pros podcast. When you see people leave their hometown and create miraculous success, it's because they left the place that housed the stories about them. And so, like, if you're trying to actively change up who you are and experiment with different personas and different belief systems and different thought informations, going and hanging out with the same crowd that you've always been with isn't going to help you because they're going to be reiterating who they've always known you to be. And that makes it much harder for you to consciously change because those people are going to say, you can't be that. Or if you try to be that, they're going to say, oh, well, that's inauthentic. And so here I would like to present that the idea of authenticity is the intentional creation of self. And in fact, the unintentional creation of self is the inauthentic self. And this is where we get shadow from. Shadow is who I truly am or who I would like to be versus who I think I'm supposed to be, right? And that's where we get shame and guilt and we keep ourselves small or we don't use our voice to convey our message to the world, right? Like whatever that looks like. we keep ourselves in a little box because it was the box that was given to us and we think it's the box that we have to stay in. It certainly feels safest, but there's no growth inside that box. Authenticity comes when you start making conscious decisions about who you truly want to be. And then knowing thyself becomes a process of creating thyself.
Yeah, I like to visualize a block of marble, and like over time you're just kind of honing it, you're chiseling it into peeling away the layers that are not self, that are not true to you, because when you're a child, like you're just this unmolded thing of clay, right? You could be anything, anybody, and the process of living life is the process of knowing thyself, in the fact that you're doing things and consequences happen. Now, sometimes that consequence is a positive consequence, and you're like, I actually really like this. And sometimes that consequence is a bad consequence, and you're like, I shouldn't have done that, and I'm not going to do that again. And it could be the very same thing. Like me and my husband could go skydiving, and he might be like, that was amazing. And I'd be like, never again. Right. Same exact experience. It may be for him and it may not be for me. But that's how we know ourselves. But people get so stuck in this fear place of everything is dangerous. And in some cases, things are dangerous. And we as a society are like, don't do dangerous things. Or if you do dangerous things, just recognize, and so people avoid uncomfortability or discomfort. They avoid risk. They avoid doing things up, even like, okay, so I don't have any tattoos. I was ingrained as a child that like you have to live the rest of your life with that. And so like I'm like, oh my God, is there anything in the world that I love enough forever? Because you and I have talked about this, that like I'm not today who I was yesterday. Like what I like, that there's a few consistent things in my life that I really still love. Cows, tortoises, like there's a few things, right? But do I love any of the art of them to put on my body forever? And I was speaking with another business strategist the other day, and she said, Sarah, she's like, you're allowed to be a collage. And I was like, what? She's like, you could just layer the versions of yourself on top of each other. And like, that's okay. If here I am on this journey and super self-aware, I still tell myself these stories that hold me back from exploring things that would tell me more about myself, right? Because I've told myself stories of risk and of fear. And like, if I got a tattoo, who's going to care other than me, And I have scars all over my body. It's not like they're keeping me up at night, But we make these small things so much bigger in our brain, when the very process of living is the process of knowing thyself, especially if you're living from your internal GPS of joy, the internal GPS of excitement, and following that inner voice that's like, ooh, that would be fun, give it a try, with no attachment to what happens. Maybe it sucks. That doesn't mean anything about you other than you tried a thing and it sucked. And like, there's real freedom in that.
Yeah, there were two things today that reflected back to me the conversation around freedom, and you just mentioned it again. So I think it might be worth expanding on that. And I really like this. So I'm going to accept it as true for now, which, guys, so we're clear, like episode 10 of this podcast may be two entirely different people having an entirely different conversation, because that's how we roll. Sarah and I, we change our minds often, oftener than often, because it's, first of all, delicious to change your mind. You get like little brain gasms when you change your mind, right? But also because like everything that's true can be proven untrue, and everything that was once untrue can easily be made true. And so anyway, for today, I'm going to play with the idea that we're always free, and then there's not shit you can do about it. And then most of us, and I sent this to you in a telegram earlier, most of us have really clever ways of hiding from ourselves. We have really clever ways of concocting cages, prisons to keep ourselves like safe. And I'm gonna say safe with quotation marks because, like, sure, you're super safe. Anybody who's ever watched The Walking Dead, like, you're super safe in a jail cell. None of the zombies can get you, but also you can't fucking get out. You know what I'm saying? So, like, that's what people do. They take on like these stories, these religions, these beliefs of their grandparents or their parents or their teachers or their friends. They take them on and they have an identity. They form an identity, and it gets really rigid. And then they hide from themselves because it's really uncomfortable to recognize one's own freedom. And Osho did a great job of explaining this. He talks about like most people don't want to be free because, first of all, you are free and there's nothing you can do about it. And so then you do everything in your power to hide from that freedom. But because there's an immense responsibility, there's a level of sovereignty required of you, a level of warriorship required of you to embody your true freedom. And that feels wildly dangerous to most people. And so they concoct all these stories about why they can't do that. To your point, they have stories of fear, limitation. And like, I mean, we all do this. I do this. You know what I mean? You don't know. Here's the thing, when you're concocting stories to hide from yourself, you're super clever. And so you don't know that you've used that story, right? I have clients that have heard me talk at great length about their shadows. We dig into their specific stories and still like call 13. We're on call 13. And I say the same thing I've said for the last 13 calls. And they go, oh my God, that is blowing my mind right now. And it's like it's the first time they've heard it. And that's because we're clever. And when we have shadow, when we create shadow, it's literally to not be seen. You created it to not look at it. And so it takes time and reflection from others, especially reflection from people who are conscious of shadow, to tell you that's a limitation. And you might be like, no, I have proof. It's a true story. Sure, but you can create proof of any story, right? And so it's a limitation. And a lot of people, they're not ready for that. They get really pissed off and they're like, nope, I'm keeping it. Like they want to fight for their like little gel cell.
True.
Right.
So I was reading a book the other day, and no one's surprised by this, but it was written by a behavioral economist. So this is a book about psychology and pricing psychology. It's a business-based book, and she has an entire section dedicated to the fact that our subconscious brain and our conscious brain don't speak the same language. Our subconscious brain is where our emotions come from, and they make almost every single decision and every single emotion that's triggered, all the things, 90% of what you feel and believe to be true, and the stories that you tell yourself, the patterns that you execute come from your subconscious. And that runs on autopilot. Your conscious brain can't communicate with your subconscious brain. They don't speak the same language. So and sometimes I wonder, when we talk about the veil in the kind of the spiritual community, they talk about the veil, if that's what they're actually referencing, which is this known scientific phenomenon that there's a barrier, a division between our subconscious, or system two, I think is what they, because Daniel in Thinking Fast and Slow talks about system one and system two, and it's the conscious brain versus the subconscious brain. They cannot communicate with each other internally without awareness. You have to consciously bring awareness around a pattern that you're doing. And that's one of the reasons why in like Alcohol Anonymous, they're like, the first step is admitting or whatever. That's bringing awareness to a thing or to a pattern that you have. And that's when you can actually start manipulating it and working with it, is that by identifying its existence, because we can run, and we do run patterns absolutely invisible to our consciousness. And which is what you're saying, is that oftentimes you need someone who's trained to like reflect back to you your shadows, because you don't know you're running them, because we have these two, it's like the angel and the devil. Right. I honestly believe that's what that is the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And it's not that the subconscious mind is the devil and like wants to like harm you. And matter of fact, it wants to keep you safe. Every single pattern that you've created is in some way keeping you safe, which is why it's so uncomfortable to make change, because all the alarm bells start going off in your head and everywhere else in your body, your stomach and your nerves, because it's like, no, don't do that. This is keeping us safe. Don't make that change. This is keeping us safe. And so, we have all of these stories and these patterns that we've built up over, I'm 41 years old, so like I've built them up over 41 years, but they even go back further than that, because we have subconscious patterns. And the best example of this that's easy at hand is the fight or flight response. That's ingrained in us genetically. So like we're born with patterns, and then we continue to layer on these subconscious patterns. And then we walk around every day. 90% of what everybody is thinking, doing, saying, believing is completely invisible to their conscious mind. And like, again,
Yeah, I want to say two things about the subconscious. Also, I've edited a lot of our podcasts, and this one will likely make it out pretty raw. Okay. And so I just want to preface with the fact that it is old for us that we say, yeah, and at every transition, you say, yeah, and when I'm finished. And when you're finished, I go, yeah, and. And so you guys are going to hear a lot of yes, and. All right. The key
Foundation
to
of improv, right?
Right, key to improv, exactly. All right, so the first one that you said was that the subconscious and the conscious don't speak the same language, and I've seen this in a through the lens of like the occult and the esoteric teachings. The subconscious speaks the language of symbols, which is why like tarot archetypes, biblical figures, religious figures, they can't quite be, people will say like, oh, well, what's my archetype? And you can only ever explain archetypes in kind of like a roundabout way, you know what I mean? Because it doesn't use system one language. It doesn't use like this very basic word of mouth type of system that we have to convey things. Because if I say to you guys, the beach, that's an archetype. Now, I could describe to you that it has sand, sun, water, trees, but you feel the beach. When I say the beach, you're like thinking about the last time you were at the beach. You can feel the sun on your skin. It smells this type of way, right? Maybe it's certain colors that you see. It's an experience. It speaks the language of symbols. Because I could also say a riverbed, and we still have sunshine, trees, sand, water, same formula, but it feels much different to be next to a river than it does to be next to the beach, right? And so that's because the subconscious speaks in the language of symbols. And this is like sigil magic, right? It's meant to remind you of a certain thing. It's meant to give you a experience of emotion and of sensation, and not necessarily to just like Webster's dictionary give you exactly what it, means. The other thing that you said was that the patterns that you have are designed to keep you safe. And guys, like if you're like, oh, that sounds great to me, I want to be safe. Unfortunately, because we are not 100% intentionally created, your subconscious may have a very different idea of what safety is than what you feel is safe. And so I'll give you guys an example. Some people feel very safe in poverty. It's predictable. They've learned to navigate it all of their lives. Their parents lived in poverty, so on and so forth. And the idea of being responsible for a large sum of money feels unsafe. Some people feel safe in abusive relationships because they've just always been in abusive relationships. Their parents were in abusive relationships. It's what they've always seen. It's what they know. And so the subconscious will default to a pattern once it recognizes that one, you didn't die. That's like it. That's the threshold. That's the subconscious. But did you die? Right. So that's how it creates patterns. But you can see how being in an abusive relationship isn't actually safe. It's just what your subconscious has associated with like you didn't die. And so to move outside of that, breaking the pattern can feel very unsafe because anything unknown is considered unsafe to the subconscious.
Add to that that no growth happens from a place of safety or comfort. And so any growth, any development, any amount of change, let's just make it simple. Any amount of change is going to come with a level of risk. Therefore, it's going to feel unsafe or it's going to trigger fears, right? And we've all done this where, like, whether you make a big purchase and now suddenly you're like, oh my God, oh my God. And like you might be really excited about this purchase, but you might be like, oh my God, what if I never see that money again? What if it never pays off? What if there's never a return on investment? And like it's just money. You're not going to die, but also your body, your nervous system is going to trigger because you've stretched a little far, right? And we do this on big and small levels all the time. Maybe you're in a meeting and you say a thing and then you sit there and you don't hear another word because you're like, did I just say something stupid? Was that offensive to somebody? Like, it's like you said a thing, you put yourself out there in a state of vulnerability, and like now you're kicking yourself because you don't know how people interpreted it. We do this all day long in big and small ways. And growth happens, development happens when we put ourselves in those uncomfortable places and we survive and we let ourselves reflect on what happened and what we now know about ourselves. I'm tying it all the way back to know thyself. You can't know thyself without putting yourself repeatedly in uncomfortable situations, uncomfortable scenarios. An example about communication and uncomfortability. I was a leader manager from a very young age. My first leadership position, I think, was at 18 years old. And I've said this before, but like I led from with one tool in my pocket, and that was authority. So I just carried a big stick. You know what I mean? Like, do it because I said so. I'm the manager. Didn't work out very well for me. And one of my first managers that actually cared handed me the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I was fucking offended. I was honestly like, but I have friends, and like I could have just sat there and, been a little snot about it. But I read the book and I reflected on, oh God, I don't do that. And oh, I didn't realize that's how I was making people feel. Right. And of course, I continued on my reading journey. I read about emotional intelligence, all this. So fast forward, I'm in another leadership position. I have 50 people under me. I don't know what any of them do. They're engineers. I'm not. I'm a leader of people. I don't know anything about the computer things. And my boss at the time said that my communication skills lacked. Now, I want to just put a little caveat here in that most people's communication skills suck when they get into the working world because we learn how to communicate from our families and our familiars. And people who come from backgrounds like me, we didn't communicate very well or very nicely, if I'm going to be honest, with each other. And so I built communication in a way that like I was always on the defensive, or I would say things to be seen instead of understood. When people were talking to me, I thought it was an attack. And so instead of meeting them where they were at and trying to like come to common ground, it became like an instantaneous battle, right? And so these are all learned skills. Anyways, he said my communication skills were lacking, and that if I wanted to move forward in my professional career, that I needed to fix it. I needed to figure it out. He gave no additional context to that. So what did I do? I do what I always do, and I started buying books and reading about it. And like that was pivotal for me because believe it or not, you can actually learn a lot about communication through the written word and through psychology and stuff. But the process of learning how to be a good communicator sucked. It sucks to feel like you're failing at something, especially when you're put in a place of authority. It sucks to know, once you know better, how many people you hurt in the process of learning that thing. And to realize that, like, oh my gosh, like I was a terrible leader all the way up here. Like that whole growth process is painful. Once there's awareness, it's painful to have to learn. It's painful to have to reflect on how you were doing it improperly in the past. And so people avoid it because people avoid pain.
I support a creator that is honing her leadership skills. And that's the work that we do is how she self leads, right? Because that's, you can't lead anybody if you don't lead yourself. And then how she actually leads a staff. And she wants me to tell her like what to say. And she wants to avoid what she sees as confrontation. And the reframe I offer is always like, it's not confrontation unless you feel confrontational. You know what I mean? Like, and so, but most of us are hardwired that way. And I told her, like, you have to get out there and fail. Like the only way to become a great leader is to be really shitty at it for a while, you know? And through being shitty at it, you learn how to be better at it. I mean, if you could see my very first graphic designs, they were absolutely terrible. The very first emails that I wrote for Mobile Bev Pros probably weren't all that great. Now, I'm a wordsmith by nature, but they probably weren't as epic as they are now, you know? And that's because you have anything you do, right? You got to suck at it first. That can be scary. So if you are like, well, where do I find a good reflection? I think I can give you some tangibles on that, right? So one, when you look to like your peeps and you're like, which one of these peeps? Because everybody's a reflection. Are they reflecting an old story, unintentional story, or are they reflecting an intentional story, a new story? The very first thing you want to look at, does this person have traits or a lifestyle that I want to participate in? Right. If you're looking for your shadows and you want to see your reflections and you look out and you see somebody who's like full of rage and very sad in their life, then when you ask them for reflection, or even when you don't ask, because people are unsolicited reflections all the time, anything you say to them, they're going to funnel through the lens of rage and sadness. And if you don't want more of that in your life, that's not a good reflection. You know what I mean? And so instead, you want to be very intentional about your curation of reflectors and who you take feedback from. Because when we say everyone is a reflection of you, I don't mean that everything anybody says about you or how they treat you is true. I mean that what it brings up in you and how you respond to it is what is true. And so if someone comes to you and they're full of rage and sadness, and they cast it up and out of themselves and throw it on you, and you receive it and you take it personally, and now you're the victim, and why do they have to be such an asshole? All right, right? That was a reflection because it landed in you. But if that person comes to me and they are an asshole and they're sad and they're full of rage and they pick it up and they throw it out of themselves and it lands on me, and I have a place of stability, a place of peace within myself, and I go, oh, that is not mine. That is also a reflection of me. You see what I'm saying? And so like, and so you want to be conscious that if you're going to someone and you want affirmation that you're making a good decision in moving across the country and getting a new job, you don't want to go to the person who has never left town, right? You want to go to somebody who maybe lives in that new town, or you want to go to somebody like, and this is why coaches are so hot, mentors are so hot, because you're absorbing a new story from someone else, right? And so
Someone
knowing
who
yourself,
someone who might have a higher hold you in a higher being, right? Or like
right?
a good coach is going to see what's possible for you and then start reflecting that story back to you instead of what you're saying, like familiars, they have a story about you already. So they're going to keep reflecting back to you what is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly that.
There's a couple things that came up for me while you're talking. The first, and this has come up multiple times in this, and so I'm just going to throw it out there. There's a new movie on Netflix, and I already recommended that you watch it, even though we don't often watch the things that we recommend to each other. But it's called Hitman, and I can't remember who the actor is, and most of it doesn't even really matter. What matters is that this dude moving through life ends up with this position where he has to wear costumes to do this work that he's doing, and he has to be believable, like his life depends on it and his job depends on it. And what he finds is that he kind of likes being this other guy. And you and I both know that it's not a costume if you like being that and then you start showing up that way. Sometimes it's just as simple as deciding who you want to be in the world and then just start showing up that way. You don't need permission. You might need a costume. Like maybe you buy different clothes, you hang out at different places, you try out new accents, you read different books. And these are all parts of getting to know thyself, right? Whether or not that's fun for you, does that evoke excitement, this new life or this new persona that you've put on? Because just because you are who you are, because that's how you ended up, doesn't mean that's who you have to stay, right? You can change. That's the first thing that came up while you were talking.
Because the costumes, this is giving alter ego, it's giving enchanted pieces of clothing. There's a book called Alter Ego by, it's too tiny, I can't read it. It's called Alter Ego. The cover is yellow and it's got like little Superman glasses where he like turns into Clark Kent, right? And like this has been shown to us in so many different places. But having an alter ego can be a very powerful way to show up for something that might feel, I'm going to give you a real world example. So I have four core archetypes, and one of them, Don Moni, she is a like very pin up. Like she's like every time I see her, like she's only wearing red. Like she's the red lady, red lips, red nails, red dress. And she only ever drinks like martinis and like wears high heels. Okay. When I have to go do something, like for example, my husband has a annual thing where everybody at his job goes to like a Christmas party, right? And they got to dress real formal. And so when I have to go and present in front of people I don't fucking know, but that know my husband very well and spend more hours with him in a week than I do, you know what I mean? It can be a little nerve wracking. Your subconscious is saying that's not safe, right? This isn't something you normally do. It's outside of the pattern. That's not safe. I can put on Dawn Moni. I can put her on and she stands different. She speaks different. She wears and she carries herself in high heels like she is that bitch. There's something about the consciousness shift when you create alter egos that allows you to interface with the world in ways that your familiar persona just can't. And so many people use this, like Lady Gaga uses this. Tons of performers. This is big in the performance art space. They put on different costumes, which is like giving the enchanted wizard's robe. You know what I mean? Because he believes it's enchanted. It allows him to like move in the world in a different way. And this is available to anyone. And it can be as simple as in the alter ego. He says, you put on a pair of glasses. There have been studies done that people respect people with glasses more. They find that people, when you view someone wearing glasses, you automatically give them 50 extra IQ points. It doesn't matter what comes out of their mouth, you think they're smarter. You know what I mean? And so, like, wear the glasses if you're going to a job interview and you want to assume a more professional appearance or you want to seem smarter. And you can do this in any number of ways.
Yep, absolutely. And I think people get this confused because they're like, be authentic, right? We're saying know thyself. And then we say be authentic. You can only know thyself by being yourself. And then we're like, but actually, you get to pick which version of you are at any moment. And so again, we're holding the paradox. We're holding two conflicting truths to be true at the same time.
And that's why I took that moment to define that when we say authentic self, we mean the intentional creation of self. Because the unintentional creation of self may feel authentic because it's safe and it's your little prison that you've created, but it's not safe because, again, it could be poverty, it could be abusive relationships, whatever you're used to. And that could be entirely inauthentic. If you came with a passion, you passed the birthing canal and you were like, I'm going to be an artist. And then all of your life, you were like indoctrined to be a farmer. That's not who you truly are. It's not who you want to be. And so that's not authentic just because you've always been that. Authentic is the intentional creation of self. So the moment that you say, fuck this row of corn, I'm going to go paint, you become an authentic creator.
Until you're like, you know what? I actually really did enjoy that corn. And you come back and you be that farmer. And that's
Right.
good. And I mention that only because in my journey here, a lot of the things that I used to resent, and I think you'll relate to this, but a lot of the things that I always saw as like a huge distraction from my work in the world have become some of my favorite moments in any given day. And so, as an example, fuck laundry. Laundry never fucking ends, right? But then when I do laundry now and I'm like, I'm so grateful I have the ability to clothe my family and buy nice clothes and that I'm taking the time and energy to care for them, to fold them, to ensure they're properly washed. Like these are moments of bliss and joy and like gratefulness that I have that I used to resent. And so that person, that me of the past was like, fuck laundry. And the me of now is like, what a great opportunity I get to just revel in the fact that like I can afford these things and that I can take care of the things that I've claimed to be mine. And I know that seems so silly, but you and I have talked in the past about, just finding the joy and the blessedness in the moments of life. And I heard somebody the other day say, if AI could do anything for you, what would it be? And like people were like, all of these houseworky chores. And that would have been me too last year. And I have someone, come and clean my house every couple of weeks in a deeper way than I do on a daily basis. So clearly I'm not like cleaning's my life, but I think I have this ability, much like the farmer turned artist, potentially turned farmer again, to look at some of these things I used to take for granted as being like a detraction from me and my mission to figure out who I am and my great work in the world and realize that like actually some of these smaller moments are just as important in the who I am and the life that I'm building as some of these bigger moments.
There's an old parable about a man who sought out like a yogi and he wanted to attain enlightenment. And the parable goes that the yogi like handed him a broom and he was like, I've been sweeping my whole life. I've been a street sweeper. What do you, and I'm probably butchering the shit. This is gonna be remix, a new parable by Dawn. And he like is like, I'm gonna sweep. I've been a street sweeper. And the yogi's like, yeah, sweep. He said, no, I'm here because you're gonna help me attain enlightenment. And he said, yeah, sweep. And so the guy goes on and he sweeps and he sweeps and he sweeps. He gets frustrated. He goes to the yogi and he's like, I never would have. Da, da, da. And like, I don't remember how the rest of the parable goes, but the very end of that parable, they talk about like before enlightenment, water the plants, do the dishes. After enlightenment, water the plants, do the dishes, right? Because what you find, and this is the beautiful thing about intentional creation of self, and I'm glad you said that, because what you find is that you've always been this, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, again, the paradox, like, the further away you journey, the closer to you become, and the more you realize that you were always home. Not home as in a physical location, home as in like you've always been this. And so you can only become more of who you truly are by shedding the layers of who you are not that made you who you are.
Yes, so you were always home, right? And some people actually have to change their physical location to feel at home, but you are always home. And when you get to that point of recognizing, and I think this is where people get lost with the you're perfect as you are, right? Like you and I understand what that means. We understand what it means when someone says you're perfect as you are. It doesn't feel that way when you're doing the work. You're like, obviously, I'm not perfect because I want to be over here. I want to do this. I want to be this. And that's not who I am. And so we're like, follow your joy. Well, if I was perfect, like I would just stay, I would do nothing, right? I would not need to change at all. And that's not what that means. But also, that is what it means.
Yeah, while we were in Nashville with the group after you had done your client experience workshop, we were out having drinks. And I remember one of the ladies that was there, I was like, enlightenment requires nothing. And she was like, but you just told us that you've spent 12 years in study of the occult and esoteric. So, like, obviously it requires something. And I'm like, no, I went around my ass to scratch my elbow. What I didn't realize then that I realize now is that there is no study that brought me closer to enlightenment because I was always there. And in fact, the study took me, you can't leave enlightenment. You can't not be enlightened aside from the belief that you're not enlightened. Like that, okay, and again, we're gonna hold the paradox because, like, well, then Dawn, you can be not enlightened, but like not, it's like when you say like you can't be outside of God. Like, well, okay, but I'm not God. I can't like look at my hand and create an apple. Okay, but you still can't be outside of God, right? And like, unless you believe you can. And then you're like, but Dawn, which one is it? And I'm telling you, both and enlightenment requires nothing unless you believe that you have to go on this like huge Mecca, at which point you will venture out on a beautiful Mecca to return home to yourself and realize that you never left.
I love that you said that specifically around God, because when I say to know thyself is to understand the world being God, the world being the everything, the all the thing, the no thing. Knowing thyself brings you right back to God.
And that, my friends, was a gospel.
And potentially a great place to end the very first episode. Hopefully, people have enjoyed our ranting and rambling and riffing. Ranting, rambling, and riffing. It's the backup name for Crowns and Chaos. And that if they feel called to have reflections or to learn more about what it looks like to work with someone who can hold you in your highest and be a reflection for you and the things that you're trying to achieve and the perfection that you are. We have the Substack and you can reach out to us there. You can engage with us through comments, through being a listener, through any number of ways, but definitely let us know what you loved about the episode, what you'd love to hear more about. I do have a short list of things that we are planning to talk about. I think our next episode, just to give y'all a little teaser. Oh, I think it literally was enlightenment.
Oh, perfect.
So we ended on a perfect note because the next thing, I have here is enlightenment slash mindset, which is a word that we don't really love, but how they play together.
Yeah, and to final expansion, when you hear it, you're going to hear us a lot say that there are words that we don't really love. And that's because we are speaking the language of symbols, and words tend to fail you when you find yourself in a language of symbols. Our Telegram is a great, Sarah and I often get on each other's Telegram and just be like, I'm gonna try and explain a thing that I can't explain, and hopefully you'll just get it. And then by the end, like we just like received it via osmosis. There were words that were said, but like I don't know what any of them were.
Absolutely. If I was a better drawer, and sometimes we do, there's like drawing of the toroidal fields and the crosses and the sometimes there are chicken scratch drawings. Sometimes it's just like looking into each other's eyeballs and being like, you get it, right? Then you picking it
I know
up.
you know. You know, I know. We know.
I know you know.
Hopefully,
You know.
hopefully now you guys know. And if you don't and you're like, what? Keep listening.
We
If you
will.
don't get anything that we said here, but there, you have a feeling that there are keys for you in this, continue listening because what we're doing here is planting seeds. That's all we're doing. We're planting seeds and they might not come to harvest this year, might not be next year, might not be. My dad likes to say that when you transplant a plant, it has a year to sleep, a year to creep, and then a year to leap, right? And so potentially we plant the seed and you're like, what? But then by episode 10, you're like, oh shit. You know what I'm saying? Episode 10's got to be lit because I've referenced it twice in this. And so keep listening. It's going to get even more delicious.
Amazing. More to come. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.